Hi everyone, it's me, Taehyung. I don't know how many of you are watching right now or where in the world you're watching from, but if you're here, thank you. Really, thank you. I know there are days when it feels like we're close, like we're together in the same room, and there are days when the distance between us feels so big, but every time I speak to you like this, I feel warm, I feel safe, I feel understood. I don't come here as an idol today, not as a celebrity, not as someone on camera or on stage. I just want to talk to you as a human being, as Taehyung, someone who's still learning, still growing, still trying to protect the people he loves. You know, sometimes the world thinks they understand everything about us, our friendships, our choices, our emotions, our private lives. Sometimes they make us pick sides, create stories, create drama, even when all we want is peace. It's strange how the more love you receive, the more pressure the world tries to put on you. And no matter how strong you are, some questions hit you harder than others. Tonight, I want to share something that happened on set, something real, something that shook everyone, including me. Some of you might have already heard bits and pieces online. Maybe you've seen the clips trending. Maybe you've seen people arguing about it. But I want you to hear the truth from me, not from headlines, not from rumors. Before we begin, I want you to know one thing. Everything I say tonight comes from my heart. Not for attention, not for drama, not because anyone forced me, but because you have been with me for so long and I trust you. So, if you are ready, take a breath with me. Forget what the media said. Forget what the comments said. Forget the noise. Just listen to me. Just stay with me because for the first time in a long time, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened and what I truly felt. When I was forced to choose between Jimin and Jungkook, I could feel it the moment I stepped into the studio. The lights were too bright, the room too silent, and the eyes on me were sharper than cameras. I've done interviews for almost a decade, but tonight something felt off. I sensed it in my chest before I even sat down on the tall chair they placed in the middle of the set. They prepared this moment for me not to talk but to react. I could tell. The host smiled warmly, yet there was something calculated behind it. The kind of smile that wasn't meant to comfort but to prepare the audience for a headline. I straightened my suit, exhaled quietly, and looked at him like I was ready, even though I wasn't. They started normally questions about the album, the tour, the music. I answered everything with ease. Fans watching from the glass window waved every time I glanced their way, and I smiled to reassure them that everything was fine. But deep inside, I could feel the tension building up like rising pressure in my chest. Cameras didn't blink, microphones didn't move. Everyone was waiting for something. And then it happened. The host leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. The energy shifted instantly. His voice dropped lower, slower, like he wanted the audience to remember every single syllable. Taehyung, he said, there's something the fans have been dying to know, and I think tonight we finally get the answer. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, waiting for what would come next, even though a part of me already feared it. He cleared his throat dramatically, smiled at the camera, and then looked straight into my eyes. Who do you love more, Jimin or Jungkook? The room didn't just go silent, it froze. The staff stopped moving, the floor directors stopped signaling, even the fans behind the glass didn't make a sound. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement turned into heavy silence. Inside my head, everything started spinning. I didn't expect the question not like that, not so blunt, not in public. It felt like someone disarmed me in front of the world. Jimin and Jungkook weren't just my members, they were part of my life, my family, my brothers, and now I was supposed to pick one live on camera with the whole world watching. I felt my throat tighten. I tried to smile to hide the shock, but it didn't reach my eyes. I'm sure everyone saw that. The host continued, pushing further, not even giving me time to breathe. You have to choose, he said. Only one name, Jimin or Jungkook. The pressure hit me like a wave. The audience didn't whisper, they didn't gasp, they didn't do anything. That was worse than noise. Silence meant attention. Everyone was waiting for me to speak. My mind ran through every memory. Late night conversations, shared struggles, laughter backstage, tears during practice, promises we made when we were trainees. They weren't idols to me. They were people. They were loved. And now someone wanted me to turn that love into competition. I took a breath, slow and deep, trying to balance myself. I knew the internet would explode no matter what I said. If I chose Jimin, some fans would be hurt. If I chose Jungkook, others would be angry. And if I refused to answer, the media would call me defensive. There was no escape. Either way, someone would get hurt. I could see the host sensing my emotional discomfort, and instead of backing off, he leaned closer. Taehyung, he repeated, just one name. I finally lifted my eyes, staring directly into the camera lens. I didn't want the studio to hear my next words. I wanted the world to hear them, not as an idol, not as a public figure, but as Kim Taehyung, a human being. But before I could speak, I noticed something. Jungkook was watching backstage. He had come to support me during filming. And not far from him, Jimin was there too. They weren't supposed to be seen, so they stayed behind the curtain. And when our eyes met, both of them gave me the same look, a gentle look, full of trust. In that second, I knew my answer. Not because of favoritism, not because of pressure, but because of honesty. I turned back to the host. The studio was so silent that even my breath felt loud. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I opened my mouth slowly and said the name. The reaction was instant gasps, frozen expressions. Even the host's face changed. The entire studio was stunned. My answer wasn't what anyone expected, and I could already feel that nothing would ever be the same after that moment. The silence after I spoke felt heavier than the question itself. It was the kind of silence that squeezes your lungs until you forget how to breathe. Everyone in the studio looked stunned, like they had just witnessed something that wasn't supposed to be said out loud. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, the host, the staff, the camera crew, the fans behind the glass. They weren't just listening anymore. They were analyzing me, memorizing every twitch of my face, every flicker in my eyes, every instinct I instinctively fought to hide. The host opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. It was obvious he didn't expect me to answer honestly. Maybe he thought I would avoid the question, or laugh it off, or give some cliche diplomatic response. Instead, I told the truth raw and unfiltered, something my heart refused to bury just to make people comfortable. Finally, the host found his voice again. Why? He whispered, almost afraid of the answer. My instinct was to protect the people I love, not expose them. But at that moment, I realized that not answering would only make things worse. So I looked down for a second, trying to gather my thoughts, then looked back up and spoke slowly. Not for the studio, not for the cameras, but for the two people watching backstage. He was there for me when I was falling apart, I said, in a way no one else could be. The host blinked, stunned. You could feel the tension break like cracked glass. Maybe he expected a superficial explanation fan service, a joke, a lighthearted comment, but I wasn't playing into that narrative. If I was going to speak, it would come from the truth. Before he could ask another question, I continued, my voice steadier this time. That doesn't mean I love the other less, I added. You don't measure family. You just carry them differently in your heart. That was the first time the audience reacted. It started with a soft gasp, then murmurs, then claps. Not everyone clapped. Some people were still too shocked, but enough to break the spell of tension the studio had been frozen in. The host leaned back, trying to regain control of the moment. He forced a chuckle, one that didn't match the expression in his eyes. Well, he said, I didn't see that coming. I smiled a little, not because the moment was funny, but because I knew I had taken back control. They wanted drama, they wanted headlines, they wanted division. Instead, I gave them honesty, even if it came with vulnerability, but the moment wasn't over. A producer suddenly approached the host and whispered something into his ear. Whatever it was, it made his eyebrows shoot up. He looked back at me with disbelief. Then, without warning, he gestured off camera and said, Ladies and gentlemen, we actually have a surprise for Taehyung. I felt my heart drop. Surprises on talk shows never mean peace. The curtain at the side of the stage rustled, and the footsteps that followed hit me harder than the host's question. First, Jimin stepped out. He tried to smile, but I could tell he was nervous. The studio lights reflected in his eyes like he was trying to keep himself steady. He walked toward me, not hesitating, not afraid, and sat in the empty chair next to mine. Then came Jungkook. His energy was different, more intense, not angry, not hurt, but fiercely emotional in a way only someone who feels deeply can be. He didn't look at the host, he didn't look at the cameras. The moment he stepped into the stage, his eyes were locked on me. My pulse spiked. It wasn't that I wasn't ready, it was that I didn't expect to face them both like this. Not in this setting, not in front of millions. The audience lost control. Screams, cheers, gasps, the chaos was instant. The staff tried to quiet them, but it was impossible. Even the host looked overwhelmed, shaking his head with excitement like the show had just turned into world news. Jimin leaned slightly toward me and whispered, It's okay. Jungkook leaned in too and whispered in the opposite ear, It's not okay. That hit me harder than the question. The microphones weren't supposed to catch their voices, but they did, and the entire studio heard their conflicting reactions. The crowd went wild. The cameras zoomed in. And suddenly, the interview wasn't mine anymore. It became something else, something emotional, unpredictable, and overwhelming. The host clapped his hands once, trying to sound enthusiastic. Well, Taehyung, now that they're here, I think the world wants to know how they feel about your answer. I felt my body stiffen. I wanted to disappear. I didn't want this to become a spectacle. It wasn't supposed to turn into a competition of emotions. Jimin was the first to speak. His voice was calm, gentle, but heavy with sincerity. If Taehyung said my name, he said, it's because he trusts me differently, and that's not something anyone should judge. Jungkook shook his head slowly and sat upright. His voice wasn't angry, it was hurt, honest hurt. It's not about judging, he said. It's about wondering why I wasn't the person he leaned on when he was at his lowest. The words stabbed through me, not because they were guilt-tripping, but because they were true. I looked between both of them, unable to breathe for a second. Every camera in the room was focused on our faces. And then the host asked the question that poured gasoline on the entire situation. Taehyung, did you ever feel like you had to protect one of them more than the other? The world didn't just wait for my answer, it stopped for it. I felt Jimin's hand gently touch mine. I felt Jungkook's stare burning through me. I was standing on the edge of a cliff again. Whatever I said next would change everything. I could feel my pulse everywhere in my throat, my ears, my fingertips. The host's question wasn't just sharp, it was surgical. He knew exactly where to cut. Did I ever feel like I had to protect one of them more than the other? If I answered yes, the world would start searching for wounds and history. If I answered no, I would look dishonest because the truth was never that simple. I didn't speak immediately. I looked down, then at Jimin, then at Jungkook. I wanted to choose my words carefully, not to please the cameras, but to respect the two people who meant more to me than anyone would ever understand. I took a slow breath. My voice came out softer than I intended, but steady. Yes, I said. I did feel like I had to protect one of them more. The audience gasped. The host lit up with anticipation. Everyone leaned forward like they already smelled breaking news. Jimin and Jungkook froze. They didn't look at each other, only at me. I wasn't sure if I should keep talking, but I had already started. If I stopped now, everything would be twisted and misinterpreted. So I continued. I protected him because he was in more pain than people realized. And sometimes, someone who smiles the brightest is the one who's hurting the most. The audience fell into deep silence. I could see pain flash across Jungkook's face. Not anger, not jealousy, just the weight of someone suddenly realizing he missed something, something big. Jimin didn't move. He looked straight ahead, almost like he knew exactly what I meant before I said anything else. The host leaned in again, pushing for the next explosion. Taehyung, who are you talking about? Jimin or Jungkook? Andor, I could have walked away. I could have refused to answer. But running from the truth isn't protection, it's avoidance. Pretending nothing happened would only hurt them later. So I faced the storm instead of hiding from it. I'm talking about Jimin. Jimin's breath caught. I didn't even need to look at him. I could feel it. Jungkook looked away. his jaw tensing, like he was trying hard to understand the situation without letting emotion take over. I continued, voice shaking a little. There was a time when Jimin was carrying more than everyone knew. He felt alone. He kept smiling so no one would worry, but I knew he was breaking inside. And I stayed close because I didn't want him to drown quietly. Jimin swallowed hard, blinking fast. He wasn't crying, but he was holding back something strong, something that didn't belong to cameras, to headlines, or to entertainment. Jungkook finally spoke, and it hurt more than anything the host could have asked. So, when you said his name, it wasn't because you love him more. It was because you felt you had to protect him more. Jimin looked at Jungkook like he was sorry for being chosen, like the answer should have been anything else. I shook my head slowly. No, I didn't choose his name out of obligation. I chose it because loving someone isn't always loud. Sometimes love is quiet, staying when the world doesn't see you staying. Jimin's breath broke in his throat. Jungkook's expression softened instantly, like something inside him unlocked. The audience didn't cheer, didn't gasp. They simply watched, swallowed by emotion. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. I wasn't an idol right now. I wasn't V. I wasn't a headline or a guest. I was simply Kim Taehyung, a man who loved deeply, imperfectly, honestly. But the host didn't want peace. He wanted escalation. So, if the situation were reversed, he asked, if Jungkook was the one who needed you most, would you have chosen him? Would you have loved him more? Jungkook's eyes widened. He didn't expect that question, and neither did I. I saw a flash of fear inside him, the fear of being compared, the fear of not being enough. I didn't hesitate this time. I love Jungkook just as much, I said firmly, but not in the same way. Love isn't linear, it doesn't have rankings. You can love two people without making them compete. Jungkook exhaled slowly, relief showing visibly in his shoulders, but the host wasn't done. Then why didn't you open up to Jungkook when you were at your lowest? He asked. That question hit like a blade. The crowd didn't move. Even the air felt frozen. I stared at the floor for a moment. I didn't want to say it. Not because it was embarrassing, but because it was true. I didn't want Jungkook to lose himself trying to save me, I said quietly. He loves with his whole heart. If I leaned on him when I was at my worst, he would have forgotten himself trying to fix me, and I couldn't let him carry that burden. Jungkook's breath trembled. It wasn't pain, it was something deeper, something too humane for cameras. And Jimin, the host asked softly. I turned to Jimin because when Jimin loves someone, he doesn't forget who he is, I said. He doesn't lose himself in the process. He stays grounded. And that's why I knew he could handle my broken pieces without breaking too. Jimin finally let out a shaky exhale and looked away to hide the emotion on his face. Jungkook leaned back and wiped his mouth with his hand, overwhelmed but calmer than before. The audience didn't applaud, they didn't scream, they just listened silently, deeply, like they understood something they never saw before. And then, when the emotional intensity reached its highest point, the host delivered one more question, the one that would push everything past the breaking point. Taehyung, after everything you just said, do you regret choosing him? Jimin closed his eyes. Jungkook stared at me. I looked straight ahead, heart pounding so hard it hurt. What I said next would change everything, not just tonight, not just the show, but our relationship forever. And despite my fear, I opened my mouth to answer. The question echoed in my skull long after the host finished saying it. Do you regret choosing him? It wasn't just a question, it was a knife. It was designed to tear something open. Jimin sat completely still beside me, frozen like he was afraid of the answer. Jungkook didn't blink. His stare was sharp, almost defensive, like he was preparing himself for something painful. I wanted to answer quickly, but my voice didn't come out. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the moment was too big, too fragile. I wished the cameras would turn off. I wished the audience would disappear. I wished we could be three people alone in a room without the world demanding our hearts for entertainment. Finally, I found my voice. No, I said, I don't regret choosing him. Jimin inhaled sharply. Jungkook's head dropped slightly, but not because he was hurt. It was more complicated than that. The audience reacted immediately, gasps, whispers, shock. But before the host or anyone else could twist my words into something ugly, I kept going. Because choosing him wasn't about loving one more than the other. It was about being there for someone when they needed me. If I regret anything, it would mean I regret protecting him. And I don't. The room shifted. Jimin's lips trembled slightly and Jungkook's eyes softened. Even the host didn't interrupt. It felt like everyone was holding their breath for what would come next. But I continued, my voice lower, heavier. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt Jungkook. I know it did, and that's the part that hurts me too. Jungkook lifted his head again. He didn't speak, but I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to understand, not judge. Jimin kept staring down at his hands, too overwhelmed to look at either of us. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to stay steady. When I was at my lowest, I chose Jimin because I needed stability. But that doesn't mean Jungkook wasn't someone I loved or trusted. I kept him at a distance because I knew if I leaned on him, he would have given everything, and he deserves to keep some things for himself. Jungkook blinked hard, eyes glistening without falling apart. His jaw tightened as he swallowed emotion. You were protecting me too, he whispered. I nodded. Always. For the first time that night, Jungkook smiled, a small one, but real. And for a second, the tension broke. But the moment didn't stay gentle for long. Jimin finally spoke, and his voice was quiet, but strong enough to shatter the room. I wish you told me, he whispered. I wish you didn't carry everything alone. You didn't have to save me. I wanted to save you too. Every muscle in my body tensed. I had never heard him say that out loud, not even in private. And now the whole world was hearing the confession meant only for two people. Jimin continued before I could answer. You didn't have to be strong for me. Even if I was hurting, I could have held you too. I just didn't want you to hide from me. His voice cracked at the end. Jungkook slowly turned toward him, shocked not in anger, but in the realization that he never knew how deep the wounds went. I tried to respond, but my voice broke before I could speak. The weight of everything the past, the expectations, the mistakes, the love hit me like a wave I couldn't stand against. I wasn't hiding because I didn't trust you, I said. I was hiding because I couldn't stand the thought of you blaming yourself for my pain. Jimin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Jungkook looked between us, his own emotions tangled in confusion, relief, guilt, and affection all at once. Then Jungkook said something that shifted the entire energy on set. We shouldn't be talking about this here. His voice wasn't angry, it was protective. He wasn't defending himself, he was defending us. He looked straight at the host, not aggressively, but firmly. This isn't entertainment, he said. This is our life. The audience erupted cheers, applause, shouts. The host tried to keep control of the show, smiling uncomfortably, trying to brush off Jungkook's comment as if it was all part of the plan. Oh, come on, we're just having a conversation, he said. Jungkook didn't smile. No, you're digging into trauma for views. The room exploded. The staff, the directors, everyone was panicking behind the cameras. The host's smile faltered, realizing he couldn't push further without looking unethical. I put a hand softly on Jungkook's arm. It's okay? He looked at me with a confusion that wasn't about the situation, it was about me. No, he whispered, it's not. It took everything in me to speak calmly. It will be if we take control of the story instead of them. Then I turned toward the host myself, my tone calm but unshakable. You asked me a question, and I answered it honestly. But we're not here to be pinned against each other. We're not rivals. We don't love each other less or more. We're not characters in a triangle. We're human. The host opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. I will answer anything about me, but I will not allow you to turn Jimin and Jungkook into sides. There are no sides. The audience burst into applause, loud, emotional, supportive. Jimin wiped his face, trying to breathe through the intensity. Jungkook nodded slowly, grounding himself again, the tension leaving his shoulders. For a moment, I thought it was over the worst part, at least. But then, the host spoke again with a tone that made my blood run cold. Then, answer one more thing, Taehyung. If there are no sides, why did it sound like you're afraid to lose one more than the other? Jimin froze. Jungkook froze. And I did too. The studio felt like it was holding its breath again. This time, there was no way out. Whatever I said next would expose the deepest part of me, a truth I never planned to share. Not here, not publicly, not ever. But there was no avoiding it anymore. I sat up straight, looked the host directly in the eyes, then glanced at Jimin and Jungkook, both waiting, both terrified for different reasons. And I finally admitted the one thing I had kept buried for so long. For a few seconds, all I could hear was silence, not from the room, but from inside myself. The entire studio stared at me, waiting for me to speak again, waiting for some kind of explanation. My hands rested on my knees, but I could feel them shaking. I didn't know if the cameras caught it, but I definitely felt it. When I looked up, I saw something in the reporter's eyes. Curiosity, excitement, maybe the hunger for drama. It was the kind of look media gives when they think they've found a headline that will burn down the internet. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe normally. I kept replaying one question in my head. Why did I have to choose? Why were friendships being turned into a spectacle? Something for people to argue about, debate about, and judge. Jimin and Jungkook weren't objects. They were my family. This wasn't entertainment for me, it was my life. But the question had already been asked, and my answer had already been heard. Jungkook still stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. Not angry, more like wounded. Like he didn't understand what he had done wrong. Like he didn't understand why I said his name after everything he'd done to protect me over the years. I wanted to stand up and reach for him, tell him the full truth, tell him why the word Jungkook came out of my mouth. But I couldn't, not with cameras rolling, not with everyone waiting to see if I would break. Then I looked toward Jimin. He wasn't surprised, he wasn't confused, he wasn't even angry. His expression was heavy, the kind of pain someone feels when they already knew the truth but were still hoping to be wrong. He blinked slowly as if he was trying to hide the hurt but couldn't. We didn't have to speak to understand each other, we never did. Jimin always understood me, even when I stayed silent. I hated it. I hated that the world made me say it out loud. I hated that the people I loved most were now staring at each other like rivals. If only they knew the real reason I chose Jungkook. If only the world understood that love has many meanings and not everything needs to be romantic or dramatic. Sometimes love means loyalty. Sometimes it means sacrifice. Sometimes it means remembering who held you when you were falling apart. Suddenly, the director signaled a break. Cameras cut, microphones faded, staff scattered across the room again. It was supposed to give us all a moment to breathe, but it only made everything worse. Jungkook didn't wait. He walked toward me immediately, fast and anxious, like he couldn't let another second pass. Hyung, he breathed. His voice cracked. Why did you say that in front of everyone? I wish someone else asked. I wished he didn't. Because the truth was going to bruise him even deeper. Before I could reply, Jimin stepped closer too. No anger, no impatience, just calm control. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't touch me, he didn't accuse anyone. Instead, he said, "You don't have to explain if you're not ready." And that hurt even more because he still chose to protect me, even while standing there in pain. I looked between the two people who had stood beside me for more than a decade through fame, through hate, through breakdowns, through victories, and for the first time in my life, I wished I weren't famous. I wished I wasn't on a stage. I wished none of this had to happen under the eyes of the world. But the world already had its headline, and I already said the words that would follow me everywhere. I choose Jungkook. Oh, I didn't regret the choice, but I regretted the way the choice was forced. I finally whispered, I need both of you. That's the truth. Jungkook's eyes fluttered. Jimin closed his, but none of us had the chance to continue. The director shouted that cameras were rolling again. No healing, no discussion, no time to fix the damage. We sat back in our positions, and in that exact second, I realized something horrifying. The world wasn't done with us. The real storm was just beginning. Before we end tonight, I want to say something that I hope every single person who's watching will carry with them, not just for today, but for a long time. We live in a world where people think they know everything just because they see a moment, a clip, a headline, a reaction, a comment. But life isn't made of single moments. It's made of whole stories, full histories, Years of love, years of pain, years of growing together. What you saw on set that day wasn't the beginning, and it definitely wasn't the end. It was just one hard chapter in a much bigger book. To everyone who stayed, who didn't judge, who didn't turn our friendship into a battlefield, thank you. You have no idea how much strength that gives me. Tonight wasn't about drama. It wasn't about picking a winner. It was about showing you the truth that even the strongest bonds are tested, and even the closest hearts can hurt each other and still choose to stay. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for loving me even when the world gets loud. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. And I love you. Good night.